The train hissed to a stop at Rollins, Wyoming, and Ruth Calder stepped onto a platform that smelled of coal smoke and sage. She carried a carpetbag that weighed almost nothing. Inside were 2 dresses, a brush, and a tin of thread. Everything she owned could fit in her arms. Everything she'd left behind could fill a grave. The conductor moved past her without a glance. Men in work clothes waited near the freight car, boots scuffing against weathered boards. No one looked her way. She stood with her bag at her feet and searched the faces for one she'd seen only in a photograph, a man with a square jaw and tired eyes who'd written 3 careful letters promising a home. His name was Henry Marsh. He was supposed to be here. She waited as the platform emptied. The men hauled crates onto wagons and left. The stationmaster locked the freight office and tipped his hat as he passed. The sun climbed higher. The wind came steady and dry, carrying dust that settled on her sleeves. By noon, she knew something was wrong. She found the town clerk in a narrow office above the general store. He was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a voice that didn't waste words. She gave him Henry Marsh's name. He opened a ledger, ran his finger down a column, and stopped. "Marsh died 3 weeks back," he said. "Thrown from a horse while riding the fence. Broke his neck." Ruth felt the floor tilt, just slightly. She steadied herself against the desk. "There was a contract," she said. "There was." He turned the ledger toward her. "Void now. You can sign here to acknowledge release, or you can leave it. Either way, the arrangement's finished. I paid for the ticket. That's your concern, not mine." He wasn't cruel. He was simply factual. The world didn't bend for circumstance. She signed the page because it seemed the only thing left to do. Her hand shook, but the letters were clear. She walked back into the street. The town was small, a row of false front buildings, a livery, a church with peeling paint. Rollins wasn't a place people came to. It was a place they passed through or got stuck in. She'd gambled everything on a stranger's promise, and now she stood in the middle of a town that had no use for her. She had $12 in coins sewn into the lining of her skirt. Enough for a room and a few meals if she was careful. After that, nothing. The boarding house sat at the end of the main street, 2 stories of graying wood with a crooked sign. The woman who answered the door looked her over and named a price. Ruth paid for 1 night. The room was barely wider than the bed. A single window faced the alley. She set her bag on the floor and sat on the mattress, springs creaking beneath her weight. Outside, the wind pushed grit against the glass in a sound like whispered warnings. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she'd learned to live without. Instead, she lay back and stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster. She'd come west because the east had used her up. She'd believed distance could mean safety. She'd believed a contract signed in good faith might hold. Now she understood. There were no guarantees. No one was coming. The world didn't care what she'd survived to get here. When morning came, she would have to decide what survival looked like next. Ruth woke before dawn to the sound of wagon wheels on frozen ground. The room was cold enough to see her breath. She dressed quickly, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt as best she could, and went downstairs. The boarding house keeper was frying eggs in a skillet, her back turned. Ruth asked if there was work to be had in town. The woman didn't look up. "Depends what you can do." "Anything that needs doing." The woman slid the eggs onto a plate and finally met her eyes. "Try the livery. They're always short-handed." Ruth thanked her and left without eating. The $12 wouldn't stretch if she spent it on meals she could skip. The livery sat at the north end of town, a low building that smelled of hay and manure and leather. 2 men were mucking stalls when she walked in. She stated her business plainly. She was looking for work. She could clean, mend, cook, or handle horses if they needed it. The older man leaned on his pitchfork and smiled, not unkindly. "Miss, we don't hire women for stable work. It's heavy lifting, and the horses don't take well to strangers. I'm stronger than I look." "I don't doubt it. But the answer's still no." She tried the general store next. The owner said he had family who helped him stock the shelves. She tried the hotel. They said they weren't taking on staff until spring. She tried the schoolhouse, thinking she might offer to clean or assist, but the teacher told her the position was filled by a widow with 3 children to feed. By midday, Ruth's feet ached and her stomach was hollow. She walked to the cafe near the center of town, a place with 4 tables and a counter worn smooth by years of elbows. A man in a stained apron was wiping down the counter. She asked if he needed help with dishes or serving. He looked her over. "I can give you today 2 bits and a meal." She took it. The work was hot and repetitive. She stood at a basin in the back, scrubbing plates and pots while steam rose around her. Her hands turned red and raw. The cafe owner brought her a plate of beans and cornbread at noon, and she ate standing up. When the supper rush came, he had her carry plates to the tables. She moved quickly, kept her head down, and didn't speak unless spoken to. At the end of the evening, he paid her the 2 bits and told her he didn't need her tomorrow. "Business is slow," he said. "Can't afford extra hands." She nodded and left. The sun was setting as she walked back toward the boarding house. The sky burned red and orange along the horizon, and the wind had died to nothing. The street was empty except for a dog nosing through trash behind the saloon. Ruth stopped at the train station and sat on the bench with her bag beside her. She counted her money. $12 minus one night's room left $11. Minus the meal she hadn't eaten but had paid for in work. She could afford maybe 3 more nights if she didn't eat. After that, she would have to leave or find another way. She thought about the river she'd crossed to get here. She thought about the man who'd made her leave. She thought about the contract signed and voided, and the clerk's ink-stained fingers moving down the ledger. Rollins didn't want her. But going back east meant returning to a place that had already decided what she was worth. She sat on the bench as the light faded and tried to imagine a third option. The wagon came down the street just as the last light bled from the sky. Ruth heard it before she saw it, the creak of wood and the steady clop of hooves on packed dirt. She didn't look up at first. Wagons passed through Rollins all the time, carrying freight or families or men with business elsewhere. But this one slowed. Then stopped. She lifted her head. The man driving had a face carved by weather and work, lines deep around his eyes and mouth. His hat was pulled low, but she could see gray threading through his dark hair. 2 children sat beside him on the bench, a boy of maybe 10 and a girl no older than 7. They were clean but worn, their clothes patched and faded. The boy watched her with cautious curiosity. The girl held a rag doll in her lap and said nothing. The man nodded toward her. "Are you stranded?" Ruth hesitated. Honesty felt dangerous, but lying seemed pointless. "Yes." "Got kin nearby?" "No." He studied her for a moment, not unkindly. "Are you waiting on someone?" "No one's coming." He glanced at the carpetbag beside her, then back at her face. He didn't ask why she was alone or what had brought her to Rollins. He didn't ask if she had money or plans. He simply nodded, as if her situation required no explanation. "My name's Thomas Reed," he said. "I've got a ranch north of here. You can have a bed and supper for a few days if you need it. No promises beyond that." Ruth looked at him carefully. She'd learned to read men by necessity. Some wore kindness as a mask. Others offered help with strings attached. Thomas Reed's face showed neither pity nor expectation. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had work waiting and had stopped anyway. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're sitting on a train platform with nowhere to go, and it's going to freeze tonight." It wasn't sentiment. It was a fact. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I can work. I won't take charity." Didn't offer charity. Offer a bed. She picked up her bag. The boys shifted to make room, and she climbed onto the bench beside the girl. The child glanced at her briefly, then looked away. Thomas clicked his tongue, and the horse started forward. They rode in silence. The town fell behind them quickly, replaced by open land that stretched flat and empty under a sky going dark. The air smelled of cold earth and distant snow. Ruth kept her hands folded in her lap and watched the horizon. After a while, the boy spoke. "What's your name?" Ruth called her. "I'm Daniel." "That's May." He nodded toward his sister. "Pa says we're supposed to be polite to guests." "You're doing fine." May turned the doll over in her hands, smoothing its hair. She didn't look at Ruth, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. Thomas kept his eyes on the road. "The ranch isn't much," he said. "The house is sound. The barn needs work. We get by." "I'm not particular," Ruth said. He nodded once, as if that settled something. The ranch appeared as a dark shape against darker land, a house, a barn, a few outbuildings huddled together like they were bracing against the wind. No lights burned in the windows yet. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and climbed down. Daniel hopped off and helped his sister. Ruth followed, her bag in hand. Thomas led them inside without ceremony. The house was plain and clean. An iron stove sat cold in the corner. A table with 4 chairs. Shelves holding tin plates and cups. Everything had its place. "You can sleep in the back room," Thomas said. "I'll get the stove going." Ruth set her bag down and looked around. The house wasn't welcoming. But it was solid. And for now, that was enough. Thomas lit the stove while Daniel brought in firewood and May set the table without being asked. Ruth stood near the doorway, unsure where to place herself. She wasn't family. She wasn't hired to help. She was something undefined, and that made her careful. Thomas nodded toward the pump by the window. "Water's there if you want to wash up. Supper won't be fancy." She washed her hands and face in the basin, the water so cold it made her fingers ache. When she turned back, May was slicing bread with concentrated effort, her small hand steadying the loaf. Daniel ladled beans from a pot that had been warming on the stove. Thomas pulled down plates and set them out. The routine was practiced, efficient. No one spoke unnecessarily. They sat. Thomas said a brief grace, words worn smooth by repetition, and they ate. The beans were plain but hot. The bread was dense and filling. Ruth ate slowly, making the food last, aware that this might be her only meal tomorrow. May watched her between bites. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. "Are you staying?" Thomas looked at his daughter. "May. I'm just asking." Ruth met the girl's eyes. "For a few days. Your father was kind enough to offer. Mama used to sit where you're sitting." The words hung in the air. Daniel stopped eating. Thomas set down his fork, his face unreadable. "May," he said again, softer this time. The girl looked down at her plate. "I was just saying." Ruth didn't look away. "What was her name?" Thomas hesitated, then answered. "Anna." "That's a good name." May nodded slightly. The tension eased, though it didn't disappear. They finished the meal in silence. When the plates were empty, Ruth stood and began gathering them. Thomas started to speak, but she was already at the basin. "You don't have to." I know. She washed the dishes while the children cleared the table. Thomas banked the stove and checked the door latch. When everything was done, he showed her to the back room. It was narrow, with a single bed and a trunk pushed against the wall. A small window looked out onto darkness. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I had this morning." He nodded and left her alone. She heard him settle the children into their room across the hall, low voices, the creak of bed frames, May's soft question about something Ruth couldn't make out. Then quiet. She sat on the bed and unlaced her boots. Her feet were blistered from walking all day. Her hands were rough from the dishwater at the cafe and here. She lay back and pulled the thin blanket over herself. The mattress was lumpy but dry. The room smelled faintly of dust and old wood. She didn't sleep right away. She listened to the house settle around her, the tick of cooling stove metal, the wind pressing against the walls, the small sounds of people breathing in nearby rooms. It was strange to be inside walls that weren't hers, surrounded by people who owed her nothing. In the morning, she thought she would need to clarify the terms. How long she could stay. What work he expected. Whether he wanted payment she couldn't afford to give. She would need to understand what this arrangement meant before she let herself believe it was real. But tonight, she was warm. She was fed. She was not alone on a train platform counting coins and weighing impossible choices. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her under. When she woke, pale light was seeping through the window, and somewhere in the house, someone was already moving. The day had started without her. She rose quickly, smoothed her dress, and went to meet it. Thomas was at the stove when she emerged, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He glanced at her and nodded toward the table. "Sit if you want. Coffee's hot." She sat. He pushed a cup toward her and took the chair across from her. The children were still asleep, their door closed. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of the stove. "I'll pay you," Thomas said without preamble. $2 a week if you help with the house and the children. Meals and the room are separate from that. You can leave whenever you need to. No questions asked. Ruth wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat sink into her palms. "That's fair. I won't ask about your business. You don't need to explain yourself." "All right." He took a sip of coffee, his eyes on the table. Anna died 2 winters back. Fever came on fast. She was gone in 3 days. He said it plainly, like he was reporting the weather. "The children manage, but they need steadiness. I can't give them that and run the ranch both. I understand. I'm not looking for a replacement." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm looking for help. That's all this is." Ruth nodded. "That's all I'm offering." He seemed satisfied with that. He stood and moved to the counter, pulling out a pan. "I'll make breakfast. You can start today if you're able." She was able. The days fell into rhythm quickly. Ruth woke early and helped prepare breakfast, cornmeal mush or eggs when the hens were producing. She cleaned the dishes while Thomas saw the animals. Daniel left for school 3 miles down the road, riding an old mare that knew the way. May was too young for school yet, so she stayed close to Ruth, watching everything with quiet intensity. Ruth swept floors and mended clothes. She learned where Thomas kept the lye soap and how much wood the stove needed to hold heat through the afternoon. She darned socks while May played with her doll at the table. The girl didn't talk much, but her presence was constant, a small shadow that followed Ruth from room to room. In the afternoons, Thomas came in for a brief meal, then went back out. He worked without stopping, fixing fence posts or moving livestock or hauling feed. Ruth could see the weight of it in the way he moved, steady but tired, like a man who'd learned to carry more than he should. One afternoon, she took water out to him while he worked on the fence line near the house. He straightened when he saw her coming, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "Appreciate it," he said, taking the dipper. She watched him drink, then looked out at the land. It stretched endlessly, empty and raw. "How long have you had the ranch?" 10 years. Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives. Anna helped build it up." He handed the dipper back. "It's hard ground. Doesn't give much. Neither does anywhere else." He glanced at her, something like understanding passing between them. Then he returned to the fence. At supper that night, May asked Ruth if she knew any songs. Ruth said she knew a few. May asked her to sing one. Ruth sang softly, a hymn her mother had taught her years ago. Daniel listened while he ate. Thomas said nothing, but his posture eased slightly. When the meal ended and the children went to bed, Ruth sat by the stove with her mending. Thomas came in from checking the barn and poured himself coffee. He sat across from her, the silence comfortable now. "You've been here a week," he said. "I have. Are you planning to stay longer?" Ruth looked up from the sock she was darning. "If the offer stands." "It stands." She nodded and went back to her work. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, the stove burned steadily. The storm came in the third week of November, arriving without warning in the middle of the night. Ruth woke to the sound of wind screaming against the house, rattling the shutters and tearing at the roof. She rose and dressed quickly, her breath visible in the cold air. When she opened her door, Thomas was already in the main room, pulling on his coat. "Storm's bad," he said. "I need to check the barn. Animals will panic. I'll come with you." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close. You can't see 3 feet in this." They went out together into a wall of white. Snow drove horizontal, stinging Ruth's face and blinding her instantly. She grabbed hold of Thomas's coat and followed as he pushed toward the barn. The wind was so loud she couldn't hear her own breathing. Her feet sank into drifts that were already knee-deep. The barn door had blown open. Inside, the horses stamped and whinnied, their eyes rolling white with fear. Thomas moved among them, speaking low and steady, checking the stalls. Ruth found a lantern and lit it, holding it high so he could see. Snow had blown in through gaps in the walls, piling in the corners. "Check the chickens," Thomas called over the wind. "Coop's on the east side." She made her way through the dark, using the barn wall as a guide. The chicken coop partially collapsed, one side caved in by the weight of snow and wind. The birds huddled together in the remaining shelter, feathers puffed against the cold. She counted them quickly. All present. She wedged a board against the damaged section to block the worst of the wind, then returned to the barn. Thomas was securing the door when she found him. "We're missing a calf," he said. The last count came up short. "In this? Can't leave it out there." They searched the nearby paddock, moving along the fence line with the lantern held between them. The wind tore at their clothes. Ruth's hands went numb inside her gloves. They found nothing in the first pass. Thomas turned back, his face grim, and started a wider circle. Ruth spotted movement near a stand of brush at the edge of the property, a dark shape half buried in snow. She grabbed Thomas's arm and pointed. They pushed through the drifts together. The calf was tangled in dead branches, too exhausted to struggle. Its eyes were dull, its breathing shallow. Thomas knelt and worked to free its legs while Ruth held the light. The wind screamed around them. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. When the calf was loose, Thomas lifted it across his shoulders and started back toward the barn. Ruth followed, her legs shaking with cold and effort. They put the animal in a stall with clean hay and rubbed it down with burlap sacks until its breathing steadied. By the time they returned to the house, dawn was breaking gray and bleak. Daniel and May were awake, huddled near the stove. May's face was tight with worry. When she saw Thomas, she ran to him. He knelt and held her briefly, snow melting from his coat onto the floor. "Everyone's all right," he said. "Storm's passing." Ruth peeled off her wet gloves and moved to the stove. Her hands were raw and red, painful as feeling returned. Thomas brought her coffee without asking. They sat together in silence, too tired to speak, while the children pressed close. The storm blew itself out by midday. They went outside to assess the damage. Fence posts leaned at broken angles. The chicken coop would need rebuilding. Snow had drifted higher than the porch railing in places. Thomas surveyed it all with a tired expression. "Months' worth of work here." Ruth nodded. "Then we'd better start." He looked at her, something shifting in his face, recognition, maybe, or respect. We. The work of rebuilding took weeks. They repaired the chicken coop first, then moved to the fence line, replacing posts the storm had snapped or shifted. Ruth learned to handle tools she'd never touched before, a post hole digger, a hammer heavy enough to drive nails through frozen wood. Her hands blistered and calloused. Her back ached at the end of each day. But the work had a rhythm to it, a purpose that settled something inside her. The children grew easier around her. May began talking more, asking questions about birds and whether Ruth had ever seen the ocean. Daniel showed her how to saddle the mare and check her hooves for stones. One evening, he asked if she would help him with his arithmetic. She sat with him at the table while Thomas cooked supper, working through problems by lamplight. December came cold and clear. Thomas paid her wages each Sunday, counting out the coins carefully. Ruth kept them in a tin box under her bed. The money accumulated slowly, but it was hers, earned, not borrowed, not owed. One night after the children had gone to bed, Thomas sat across from her at the table. He held his coffee cup but didn't drink. His face was thoughtful, distant. "I married young," he said finally. "Anna and I met at a church social. She was 17. I was 19. We didn't know each other well, but we thought we did." He paused. "She was good. Patient. Kind even when I didn't deserve it. When she got sick, I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought I could manage alone. By the time I realized I couldn't, it was too late." Ruth listened without interrupting. The stove ticked softly. "I learned something from that," Thomas continued. "Silence is a choice. So is asking. I've tried to do better since, but it doesn't bring her back." He looked at Ruth then, really looked at her. "I'm telling you this because you've been here almost 2 months, and I don't know anything about you except that you work hard and you're kind to my children. You don't have to tell me. But if you want to, I'll listen." Ruth set down her mending. Her hands folded in her lap. She'd kept the story locked down for so long that speaking it felt like opening a door she'd nailed shut. "There was a man back east," she said. "He worked for the family I was keeping house for. He said things that made me believe he cared. Then he took what he wanted and told everyone I'd offered it." Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped each other tightly. "No one believed me. The family let me go. People talked. I couldn't find work. Couldn't stay in the same town without seeing it in their faces, the judgment, the pity. Both were the same in the end. Thomas didn't reach for her. He didn't offer comfort or try to fix what couldn't be fixed. He simply nodded. "I'm sorry that happened," he said. "You didn't deserve it. No one ever does." They sat in silence for a long time. The wind moved around the house, but inside it was still. Ruth felt something loosen in her chest, not forgiveness or healing, but acknowledgement. Someone had heard her and believed her and asked for nothing in return. "I came west because I thought distance would matter," she said. "I thought if I could just get far enough away, I could start over." "Did it work?" She considered the question. "I don't know yet." Thomas finished his coffee and stood. "Well, you've got time to find out." He left her alone with the lamp burning low. Ruth sat for a while longer, watching shadows move across the walls. Outside, the land stretched dark and empty. Inside, the house held steady. She rose and banked the stove for the night, then went to her room and lay down. Sleep came easier than it had in months. The letter arrived in mid-January, delivered by a rider passing through on his way north. Thomas brought it in from the road and handed it to Ruth without comment. She recognized the town clerk's handwriting immediately. She opened it at the table while Thomas made coffee. The language was formal and brief. The bride contract between herself and Henry Marsh was officially voided. She was released from all obligations. The document was a matter of record. No further action was required. Ruth folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Thomas glanced at her but didn't ask. She appreciated that. "It's finished," she said. "The contract. It's done." He nodded. "That's good, then." "Yes." She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of choice settling onto her shoulders. She was free to leave. Free to stay. Free to decide what her life would look like without debt or obligation hanging over it. The freedom felt heavier than the contract ever had. Spring came slowly that year, the ground thawing in patches. They planted a kitchen garden behind the house, potatoes, carrots, beans. May helped Ruth mark the rows with string. Daniel cleared rocks from the soil. Thomas built a fence to keep out rabbits. The work continued, steady and unremarkable. They lost a hen to a fox one night and replaced her with a younger bird from a neighbor's flock. The mare went lame and recovered. The calf they'd saved in a storm grew strong and healthy. Ruth realized one evening that she'd stopped counting days. She no longer measured time by how long she'd been at the ranch or how much money she'd saved. Time had become something else, seasons and tasks and the rhythm of a household that functioned because everyone contributed. In late April, Thomas asked her to sit with him after supper. The children were in bed. The house was quiet. "I need to say something," he began, his hands resting on the table. "I care for you, Ruth. Not because you work hard or because the children need you, though both those things are true. I care for you because of who you are." Ruth's heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. "Thomas. Wait." He held up a hand. "I'm not asking anything. Not yet. I want you to know where I stand, but I won't ask you to marry me unless you want it. And I'll hear no answer except a clean one. If you say no, you're still welcome here. Nothing changes except we'll know where we stand." She looked at him, this man who had stopped his wagon for a stranger, who had given her work and wages and asked for nothing but honesty. Who had listened without fixing, who had respected her silence and her words equally. "I want a life that doesn't depend on fear," she said. "Or debt. Or someone else's decision about what I'm worth." "So do I." "Then ask me again when you're ready. And I'll give you an answer when I am." He nodded, and the conversation ended there. 2 months passed. They worked through spring planting and early summer heat. May started calling her Ruth mother, shy and uncertain at first, then with more confidence. Daniel asked her opinion on things that mattered to him. Thomas smiled more. One evening in June, he asked her properly. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the fields they'd planted together. He asked if she would marry him, and he said clearly that she could say no and nothing would change. She said yes because it was her choice. They married quietly at the ranch with just the children present. No debt changed hands. No contracts were signed. The house stayed plain. The work stayed hard. Ruth kept the clerk's letter in a drawer. She didn't need it anymore, but she kept it as a reminder. Freedom wasn't given. The home wasn't rescued. It was built by people who chose to stay and chose to work and chose each other, day after day, until the choosing became the foundation itself. The land stretched wide around them. And the house they'd made together held firm. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments below. What moment stood out to you the most? And if you believe in second chances and love built on respect, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories from the Wild West. There's always another tale waiting, and I'll see you in the next one.